Welcome to Emtron Training Part 56. In this training tutorial, we're going to take a look at working with our launch control programming. Our launch control allows us to have consistent and repeatable launches. We're going to go and look at all the ways we can implement our launch control for naturally aspirated, supercharged, and turbocharged applications. We have a lot to cover. Let's jump in so we can check this out. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at working with programming our launch control feature into our Emtron ECU. Our launch control allows us to have repeatable and consistent launches on a drag race vehicle or a road race vehicle that's doing a standing start. Now we can use a launch control, whether we're going to be turbocharged, naturally aspirated, or supercharged. When we're in a turbocharged application, it's very specific of how we want to apply the launch control. We'll talk about that and how to do that in order to build boost off the line in this tutorial. Now we can implement the launch control in a slightly more advanced manner than just having a stationary RPM limiter when we're launching to get consistent launches. We can use it and span it across something like first gear. If we're in a traction limited vehicle, we can limit the acceleration rate of our particular vehicle so that we don't go into wheel spin when we're in track conditions that may not be very ideal. So we're going to take a look at how to implement that as well in this tutorial. The first thing we need to do in order to set up and work with our launch control feature is going to go in and set up a wheel speed sensor. Now we've talked about this in other tutorials. I want to go back over it real quick in this tutorial in the beginning because we need to have this working and calibrate it properly. It's relatively simple to do. I want to make sure we have all the information we need in just a single tutorial so that if you're skipping over other tutorials or coming back into this tutorial to go in and set up a launch control, you're going to have all the information in just one single video. So the first thing we need to do is move from our tuning area here. We need to go into configure and then into channels and then into input setup. Under input setup, we're going to go in here to our speed area, and we want to go and set up our wheel speeds. Now, in my case, I have a driven speed and an undriven speed, or ground speed and drive speed. We can find those options right here. So in order to make the launch control work, we just need to have a speed sensor coming in. If I want to make something like traction control work, well, in that case, I would need a wheel speed sensor from the driven wheel and from the undriven wheel, or drive speed, ground speed. If I want to use my traction control for cornering purposes, as well as acceleration straight line purposes, we'd want to wire in all of the speed sensors from all of the wheel speeds. In that case, we would specify and be more specific here of drive speed or undriven speed and whether that's going to be left or right or front or rear in terms of the drive speed or undriven ground speed. In this case, in order to make traction control work at the bare minimum, we just need one wheel speed sensor from a driven and undriven wheel. And in this case, that's what I've set up. Now, when we're talking about the launch control feature, we need to have, and I personally find that it works best on ground speed. If we're using the launch control to limit the acceleration rate of our vehicle because we don't want to go into wheel spin, the ground speed will be consistent in terms of tracking the acceleration in our gear. If we're using something like drive speed or vehicle speed, any of our drive speed options here, if we go into wheel spin, that's going to feed in more speed, which can throw off how we're referencing the limiter if we're using the launch control in its more advanced programming state. So I like to work with ground speed, and that's what I'm going to go and show you how to set up here. Whether we're working with a drive speed or ground speed or any of these other driven or undriven speed options, how we set it up is the exact same. Let's jump in here to ground speed and take a look. Now, a couple things before we jump in here and set our configuration details up. In my case, in order to implement a ground speed sensor, I'm using the OEM ABS wheel that's mounted onto the hub of my vehicle. I've made a bracket and I'm putting a Hall effect sensor as the pickup in order to transmit the number of pulses that we're reading to calculate what the speed is going to be of our vehicle back into the Emtron. So the sensor itself is Hall effect. We need to go and set up our configuration details here. Now under the input source, I've set up my digital input 7 as my, it's going right here, as my ground speed. That's where I've wired it into. So a Hall effect sensor has 3 wires. I have a power, a ground, and then the signal. Now the ground is going to a sensor ground on the Emtron, and the power is coming from an 8-volt reference source on the Emtron. The signal is what we've wired in here to our digital 7. If I click OK, we can see under the input settings, we need to configure some things here. Input settings here, I'm going to select a Hall option because my sensor is a Hall effect. If it was a ABS sensor, I would select magnetic as the option, but in this case, it's a Hall. Now, anytime I choose a Hall sensor for a wheel speed, I'm always going to choose falling as the edge to look for the signal as it's counting the pulses. This is a more reliable option than rising, so I like to work with this option of falling.
Now the pull-up here may or may not need to be toggled on. I'm going to leave it off and I can always test it. If I'm not getting a signal output from my sensor, then I'll toggle the pull-up on. The filter, I would recommend to probably put something low like 5 or 10 to get started with. And then if you're noticing that you're getting kind of erratic readings in your speed sensor reading from your ground speed, then you might need to move up your filter amount here, but 5 or 10 is a good starting point. Now the scaler has to be determined. This is our calibration to make sure that this ground speed is actually picking up correctly. The scaler amount will be specific to the number of teeth you have on your wheel speed sensor for your pickup, and then as well as your tire diameter. So what we need to do is place it into our Excel spreadsheet calculator that provided in the training course. We can find here the number of teeth. That's the number of teeth on your wheel speed pickup wheel. In this case, my number of teeth here is going to be 40. Enter. And then the wheel diameter here is going to be in centimeters.
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here. And you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.